Hey, I'm Johnny. Welcome. Today I'm going to show you how to make a hybrid app that runs with React Native and React on the web. And as an example app, we're going to build a really simple Pokedex that shows you a list of Pokemon and allows you to click on one of them in order to see its details. So let's get started. The first thing we want to do is go to expo.io. Expo is a service that's going to allow us to run our native app locally without having to worry about setting up a simulator for iOS or for Android. We're going to need two things from the Expo website. One is the XDE and the other is the client. So let's go to Tools over here on the top, and you can download the XDE by clicking on XDE. It gives you download links on GitHub, and depending on what OS you have, you can click the different links. So I have a Mac, so I'm going to download the DMG file, and once I've done that, I can run the installer. I'm not going to do it because I already have it on my computer, but once you have it downloaded and you run the installer, it's going to be pretty straightforward. They'll give you all the instructions, and it shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes to get all the way through. Once you have that, you can get the client, and that once again will depend on what kind of OS you have on your phone. So if you have an iOS phone, you can get it from the App Store. If you have an Android, you can get it from the Play Store. But both links are right there on the Expo website. Once you've downloaded and installed Expo on your phone and on your computer, it's going to ask you to create an account. So you can do that, and it shouldn't take you more than a couple minutes. It's going to send you an email for confirmation. And once you've created an account, you'll see a screen that looks like this on your computer. And here's where you can finally create a new project. So let's do that. I'm going to create a new project by clicking here. And I'm going to choose the blank template, and I'm going to call my app Pokedex. Make sure it is in the folder in which you want your app to be, and click create. Once your app is created, you'll see the messages on the left that say tunnel connected and project open. You can now use share or device buttons to view your project. And on your device, if you're signed in with the same account, you should be able to see the app that you just created listed under recently in development. As you can see over here, Pokedex on Johnny MVP2 and a long link. So when you click that one, it should take a couple of minutes for it to finally load up. And when it does, you'll be able to see your app on your mobile device. My webcam is acting up, so I have to change cameras, and that's why I'm off to the side now. But our app is working, that's what matters. And now we want to make changes to it. So use your favorite code editor to open up the project folder that Expo just created for you. I'm using VS Code. And now that we have our app open, let's take a look at app.js. And here you can see the message that was showing on your phone. And now we're going to set up our app so that it can run on the web. With our terminals open, let's add some packages to this project in order to allow it to run on the web. Make sure you have NPM on your computer, and you could use Yarn as well, but if you don't have Yarn, you can just do npm install. I'm using Yarn add, and the first one I'm going to add is React scripts. You might recognize this if you've ever used create React app. It's the packages that those projects use in order to bundle up your React code and run it on your browser. I'm also going to add React DOM and React Native Web. This is the magic library that's going to allow us to convert React Native code into regular React code that runs on the web. We're also going to add React Art, and this is a peer dependency of React Native Web, so it won't work without it. And our two routing libraries. The first one is React Router Native. This is the routing library used for React Native. Well, it's one of many, but one of the most common ones. And React Router DOM. Very similar library, but used for React on the web. So give it a couple of moments for those to download. Once all those dependencies are downloaded, you can just make sure they're there by checking your package JSON in order to make sure that all the dependencies are listed. Now that we know that all the dependencies that we'll need are here, we need to start restructuring our project in order for it to work with React scripts. And the first thing we need to do is create a source folder. Once we've done that, we need to copy our app.js into that source folder, because this is where our React scripts will look for our React code. Then, just to keep things clean, let's make sure that our app.js is simply importing the source/app.js and rendering that one. So it's going to look a little something like this. So let's call it hybrid app. We'll do import hybrid app from source app. And then over here, all we're going to do is render the hybrid app component that we just imported. So now all our code is going to be inside our source folder, but because Expo is looking for an app.js at the root level, here we'll just have a component that is simply importing and rendering the component from our real code base, which is inside source. Once your app.js at the root level is refactored to import the app code from your source folder, just check on your phone to make sure that things are still rendering properly. And you can always just change the text around to make sure that it's changing the way it should be. And now we can render this on the web. We need a few things. We need a public folder at the root level. So let's create a public folder. And inside this public folder, we're going to create index.html. In your index.html, create a really simple HTML skeleton. And you can give it a title of Pokedex. And the important thing that you'll need here is a div tag that has an ID attribute of roots. So ID equals, and between quotation marks we'll put roots, because this is what your code will target in order to render your React app. So back in source, we're going to create our index.js. And this file here is what your React scripts code will look for in order to render your app. Inside our index.js, we're going to import React. And we're going to import React DOM. And of course, so that we have some code to render, we have to import the app component from the same folder. Now we only need one line of code to have this rendered, and that is React DOM.render. And this function takes two arguments. The first is the component that we want to render, which in our case is app. And the second is the element in which you want to render this component. And that's going to be the one that has the ID of root. So we're going to use document.getElementById, and we're going to pass in root. Cool. So now all the code that we need to render our app is here, but we need some scripts to actually run this. Here in our package.json, we're going to create a new key called scripts. And here we're going to pass in an object, and we're going to add two new scripts. One is going to be start web, and that's going to have a value of React scripts start. And the second one is going to be build web, and that's going to have a value of React scripts build. So now whenever we type in npm run start web or yarn start web, we're basically calling React scripts start, and the same thing for build web. So open up your terminal and try it out. Here I'm going to run yarn start web. Give it some time, And in a few moments, if you go to localhost 3000, you should see your app running with the same text that you had before. Open up app.js to start working on your app. Cool, so now our app is working both on our phone and on the web. Right now, all our app does is show a message that says, open up app.js to start working on your app. That doesn't really count for much, so let's make our app actually do something. We're gonna build a Pokedex, so we need some Pokemon. Let's create a file that's going to store that list of Pokemon so that we can reference it. Create a new file inside source called Pokemon store.js. And here we're going to export default and pass in an array of Pokemon. So I already wrote mine before. You can pause the video to copy it and write it out if you want. But it's really straightforward. It's just an array with 3 objects, each representing a Pokemon with 4 properties: number, name, photo URL, which I just found on the internet, a picture of that particular Pokemon, and type. Once we have this list ready, we can now import it into our app and render it. So right below this import statement, we're going to import Pokemon from Pokemon Store. And now we have access to that array. And we're going to render it using the conventional way of rendering lists in React Native, which is flat list. So we can replace this and we can put flat list. And flat list takes a few properties. The first one is the data, of course. That's going to be which data do you want this flat list to render. And here we're just going to pass in Pokemon. The next one that it needs is key extractor. Key extractor is the function that it's going to run on each item in order to get a unique key. And this isn't going to be necessary if the items already have a key property, but in our case, they don't. So we're just gonna make each Pokemon number a key. So this function, return Pokemon.number, is how we're going to get each unique key for Pokemon, because each Pokemon has a different number. And the last property we need to pass into flat list is the render item. And this is what we're going to use to tell our flat list how we want it to render each item. And first we're going to access the item through destructuring. Then in our callback, we're going to return a text component which has as its content the item dot name, which in this case is going to be the name property of the Pokemon that is being rendered. Looks like I misspelled flat list, so I'm going to go back and change this to a capital, save it, and once it's saved, I can check on my web app to make sure that my list is rendering properly. Here I have Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle, and of course check on your phone as well to make sure that your list is rendering there as well. Just to clean things up a bit, let's just add some margin at the top by putting margin top. Just 50 will be okay. And also we'll put padding as 50. And now our list doesn't stick to the top anymore, which looks a little bit cleaner visually. What you might find, especially if you're building apps that are a little more complex, is that your layout is going to look different on the web than it is on your mobile device. And one of the ways you can fix that is by changing the layout specifically on the web by creating a CSS file that targets your web layout. Here I'm going to create in my source folder a file called index.css. And before I forget, I'm going to import it to my app here by writing import./index.css. In my index.css, I can write rules targeting the root element, and now whatever rules I write between those two curly braces are only going to be applied to my web app and not my mobile app. Now we need to look at platform-specific code, because some things work on web and some things only work on native. And there are different ways to handle that. And I'm going to show you one of them. Let's first navigate to our source folder. Let's create two separate routing files. One is going to be routing.web.js, and the other one is going to be routing.native.js. And I'll explain very soon why exactly we're using this kind of naming convention. So let's first go to routing.web.js, and here what we're going to do is import and at the same time export some components from the React Router React Router DOM library that is a part of our dependencies. So we're going to export, destructure, browser router as router, switch, and route and link from React Router DOM. Copy this because we're going to use something very similar in our routing.native.js over here. In routing.native.js, just paste what you had before, but we need to change a couple things. One is instead of browser router, we're importing native router. And instead of importing from React Router DOM, we're importing from React Router Native. Okay, now that we have both routing libraries set up, before we wire them up to our app, let's make sure that we have some routes to render. And so we're going to create two new components. One is going to be home. That's the component that's going to render our list. And the other one is going to be Pokemon, and that's the route that's going to render the details of one specific Pokemon. So let's create the two files, home.js and Pokemon.js. In home.js, you can just create a functional component. And here, what you can do is just copy over, or even cut it because you won't need it in an app anymore, the list of Pokemon that you are rendering before. So you can just cut this and paste it inside home, inside of a view tag, of course. And of course, to make sure that this works, you have to make sure that you are importing the flat list from React Native. And of course, make sure that you are also importing the Pokemon from Pokemon Store so that you have something to render. In Pokemon.js, we're going to write another functional component. And this component is going to render information about one Pokemon. So let's import our list. Import Pokemon from Pokemon Store. And we're going to save the first Pokemon on that list into a variable called example Pokemon. Now that we have our imports, let's render some information about this Pokemon. And the first thing we're going to render is a view tag. And inside this view, we will put a text tag with an interpolated string. That's with some curly braces and some backticks inside it. And inside that string, we will put a number sign with a string interpolation that represents the example Pokemon's number property. So example Pokemon dot number. Then we can just copy that down in order to create a new string, and that one is going to say the Pokemon's name. So example Pokemon dot name, and you can put right before it name with a colon. Then we can put its type as well. So just copy that down, put type colon, put example Pokemon dot type. And now we want to show the image of the Pokemon. So let's render one more view tag. And now we're going to put an image tag over here. An image component, I should say. And this image component is going to take a few properties. One of them is going to be style. Just to keep things simple, we'll pass in an object that says width 50 and height 50. And source, we're going to pass in an object with a key of URI and that key's value as example Pokemon dot photo URL. Save that, and now we can wire up our routes. Let's go back to our app.js, and now that it's empty, we can render our routes in here. Let's get rid of text and flat list because we don't need them anymore over here. And now we can import our routing code. Import router switch and route from routing. Now you might be wondering, which one is it importing? Routing.web.js or routing.native.js? And the cool thing is, it's going to import whichever one is relevant to the platform that your app is being compiled for at the time. So when it's being compiled for web, it's going to use routing.web.js, and for native, it's going to use routing.native.js and ignore the web one. So now let's use our router component. Inside it, we'll make a switch component. And inside the switch component, we will write our two routes. And our first route, our root route, is going to be our home component. So we'll put exact, because we want it to match exactly, path equals roots. And we could use components, but instead I'm going to use render. And you're going to see why in a few minutes when we start passing in props. So we'll use render, and render is going to take a function. So our function is going to take props as a parameter and render the home component. And it's going to pass in all the props. We'll pass in some more props after that, but for now we'll just pass in these default ones. And our next one is going to be path equals Pokemon, and the render method is going to be very similar. Props, and we'll render the Pokemon component along with all the props. I missed a dot here. And the last thing you need to do before saving it and checking on your browser is making sure that you have your components imported before you render them. So we'll import home from home, and we'll import Pokemon from Pokemon. And it looks like I forgot to import the image component on the home side, so let's go back and do that. My mistake. Cool. One quick thing I missed earlier, make sure you have a / here before Pokemon, and that's going to make sure that it's looking for an absolute path and not a relative path. Once that's ready to go, you can check on your app on the browser side or even on your phone. But you're going to need your browser to check the Pokemon route right now because we don't have any dynamic route changing yet. So what you can do is just type in /Pokemon in your address bar to go to it manually. And you should see the number, the name, the type, and a picture of the first Pokemon in your list. Now this is the home stretch. We need to add a little more functionality so that this Pokedex can work the way we want it to. The first thing we want to do is go to app.js and create a function called select Pokemon. And this function will do exactly what its name says. It's going to take a Pokemon as a parameter. Let's call it selected Pokemon. And what it's going to do is set that Pokemon to the state. So we'll do this dot set state and selected Pokemon. Now let's pass in this function that we just created into our home component. And now we'll need to go into our home component and find a way to actually call it. In our home component, we need to create a touch handler or a click handler, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it click handler because that's what I'm used to. And this is going to take a Pokemon and, oh, I need to make it a const. This is a functional component. It's going to call props.select Pokemon. And it's going to call that function and pass in the Pokemon that has been clicked on. Then we're going to call props.history.push, and we're going to pass in Pokemon. Now props.history.push is a function that you have access to because of the routing library that we installed, and allows you to change routes dynamically with your code. And it's going to go to whatever route corresponds to the string that you're passing into. In this case, we're passing in the string Pokemon, so it's going to go to our Pokemon route. Great, we have the click handler, but we need to actually hook it up to our Pokemon items. We need to import a component called touchable opacity. And let's use this touchable opacity component to wrap our text component here. Touchable opacity takes a onPress prop that takes a callback as its value, and we're going to pass in our click handler. Now that I think about it, I think handle press makes more sense, so let's change this to handle press. And we'll pass in a function that calls handle press with the item, which in this case is the Pokemon. So this right here is going to call the press handler with our Pokemon. The press handler in turn is going to call props.select Pokemon from the app component, and it's going to pass in our Pokemon. And once that function is called, it's going to navigate over to the Pokemon route with this function over here. Props.history push with the string Pokemon as the argument. This is going to allow us to pass upwards information about the Pokemon that's selected from this home component up to our app component. And now when this function is called, the Pokemon that is selected will be passed up into this function, and here it's going to set into the state as selected Pokemon. And now we need to pass down that selected Pokemon from the app state into the Pokemon route and the Pokemon component over here so that we can see it. So let's do that over here. We'll do selected Pokemon equals this dot state dot selected Pokemon. And we need to make a few changes to our Pokemon component. Here in our Pokemon component, we can get rid of the example Pokemon here, and we can get rid of the imported Pokemon from Pokemon Store, because now we'll be getting a Pokemon passed down from the app component through the props. So why don't we save it into a variable here called selected Pokemon const selected Pokemon destructured equals props. So this is basically saying const selected Pokemon equals props.selected Pokemon. This is just syntactical sugar. All right. One thing we need to do is render something if there is no Pokemon selected. So we can just say if selected Pokemon, and we will return a view with some text that says, I don't know, something really simple like no Pokemon selected. Otherwise, if there is a Pokemon, then render that Pokemon's information. Let's change these variables to selected Pokemon. Before we move on, let's create a back button because right now we have no way of going back from the selected Pokemon to the main list. So we'll create a variable called back button. That's just going to render some JSX. And here we're going to use a link tag from our router. So we're going to import link from routing. Once again, it's going to use the web version for web. It's going to use the native file for native. And here we're going to render our link. Link needs a to property in order to know where to redirect to. In this case, we're going back to our home component, which is the root route. So we'll just put in slash as the value of that particular property. And inside it, we will render some text. That simply says, go back. Now we can render this back button wherever we want. So let's put it here inside our no Pokemon selected case. And we'll also put it over here in the regular case. Now let's check on what our app looks like. Okay, we get an error because right now there is no initial state. So we need to set one. Let's go back to our app and we will just write state equals selected Pokemon null. Now let's go back and check. Another error. Props select Pokemon is not a function. And that is because I did not pass in that prop properly here. So I need to add equals select Pokemon. This.select Pokemon. And now we can go back. We see the list of Pokemon. We click on one. We see the Pokemon. We can go back and choose a bunch more. Things are working great. Before I finish off the video, there's one more kind of bonus tip I want to show you. And it's related to platform-specific code, something we talked about already. But instead of having to separate things into different files, sometimes you want to have some platform-specific logic on just one particular part of your code. For example, if I want to have a share button, that's going to be really useful on a mobile device because it can open up my text messaging service, it can open up Facebook Messenger, it can open up iMessage. But on a web app, such a button wouldn't be as useful. So I want to put a share button only on my mobile app. And in order to do that, I can have some logic that renders something only if I'm on mobile. So let's go to our Pokemon component. And from React Native, we're going to import a component called platform. And this platform component is going to have access to information about whatever platform the app is running on at the time. So with that information, what we could do is write some logic here that says if platform.os is not web, we want to show something. In this case, we want to show a share button. So we'll put that between view tags, and we'll put button, which we'll import as well in a bit. Title equals share, and on press equals this handle press. Let's close that off. Up here, we will import button and also share. And down here, this should actually be handle press. My mistake, not this dot handle press. We'll define that right here. Const handle press equals a function that calls share.share, and this on your old device is going to open up a menu that lets you share depending on whatever apps you have installed on your phone that let you share things. And it takes two things: message. This will be check out my favorite Pokemon, and URL, which will be props.selectedpokemon.photo URL. One last thing, it looks like I misspelled platform, so let me go and change that. Platform. Now that I spelled platform properly, I save my code, and when I open the app on my phone, I can see the list of Pokemon. I can tap on one of them, and I have a share button that when I tap, opens up a menu that lets me share information about the Pokemon through different apps. However, if I go on my browser and I refresh, if I click on that same Pokemon or any of them, I have the information, but I don't have that share button. So that share button is being rendered conditionally only if the platform is not web. So that's really convenient if you want to show certain things on some platforms and not others. So that's it. Congratulations, you've built your first hybrid app using React Native and React on the web. Our example was relatively bare bones and simple, and as you build more complex apps, you're bound to run into some compatibility issues, but there are some great examples and some great documentation out there. I'm going to post some links in the description that were really helpful for me. I'm going to leave it at that. Please, if you have some more questions, let me know in the comments. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys next time.